Happy Hanukkah. Adam Taxon here with Rabbi Avi Rubenfeld of Chabad of Chesterfield, which is in the outer suburbs of St. Louis, as opposed to the inner suburbs, which got a lot of attention, Ferguson, in the last few months. But we are talking about Hanukkah, and specifically here, Hanukkah and the war on women, a catchy term that the Democrats are going to phase out because it didn't work too well in the last election. And of course, that is just to hook you. But Rabbi, thank you for joining me, and tell us about how Hanukkah relates to on the war on women, or at least a war on women.
Sure, thank you, Adam. And the war on women that you're referring to is something that we discussed just recently on our Torah in 5 daily conference call that we do at 12:20 Central Time. Everybody's always welcome to join that. But the war actually was almost a little known fact of Hanukkah, and celebrated by having women in particular observe Hanukkah in a greater way, in a sense, than men do. That men are allowed to do work, labor, or other things while the Hanukkah candles are burning, whereas Jewish woman is meant to observe that in a way that she would not do anything during the candlelight, the candles burning, in order to commemorate the fact that during the time of the Hanukkah...
Wait, Rabbi, let me interrupt with what you mean by that. Do you mean that while the candles are burning, she can't prepare, for example, Hanukkah potato pancake latkes? She can't cook.
That's the man's job. The man's job is to do the latkes while the candles are burning. Beforehand, she can do that, or after, she can do that. But during the candles burning, that's when the man kicks in and says, "Hey, honey, put your feet up, relax. I'm going to take care of everything."
And I want to make a distinction clear for the listeners, not all of whom are as schooled in Judaism as you and I are, but that most Jewish holidays are, you don't work. You don't work during the holiday days of Passover, certainly not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even Shavuot, Sukkot, the holiday days. But Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av are rabbinical holidays. Anything I missed there? So you can actually go to work. Anything else I need to say about that, or I just want to make it clear to people?
That is a good distinction, yeah.
Okay, so we work on Hanukkah. Okay, sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to interject that right there.
Sure. So the reason for that, and the reason for that distinction in practice, again, that's not during the entire Hanukkah. That's just during the time when the candles are burning, is because during the time when the Syrian Greek army was occupying Judea, or today known as Israel, the Greek general, the Syrian general, and the reason why there's that interchange between Greek and Syrian is because the Syrians are the ones who conquered Greece, but in a certain sense, Greece conquered Syria because the Syrians fell in love with the Greek culture, which is what led to the Hellenistic movement, trying to force other nations to worship the way they believed or the way they observed.
Sort of like the German barbarians in Rome. That's happened throughout history a number of times, but Greece was a very attractive culture.
Sure. So the reason for the women, in your words, the war on women, was the general actually set out a terrible, horrible decree that wasn't just disgusting and horrific for us, but it was intentionally meant to ruin the morale of the Jewish people, because one thing that the Jewish people have always been able to pride themselves on is the purity within Judaism and the Jewish people. So prior to any Jewish girl being capable of getting married, the decree was that, and they would oftentimes just kidnap a girl as well, the decree was that they have to be violated by the Greek general. And as a matter of fact, that ultimately brought their downfall as well, because Yehudit, the daughter of the high priest, was one of those girls that they kidnapped, and she ended up feeding the general cheese and making him extremely thirsty, and that led to him drinking all that wine, which caused him to get drunk and fall asleep. And when that happened, hand, literally, so to speak, and she took his sword and gently helped benefit the rest of society by removing his head from his shoulders. And she paraded that around town, which actually is the straw that broke the camel's back. That was what ended the war. That's what when the army finally retreated. So that being the case, the war and the terrible decree affected the women directly, and it also led to the woman being the one who brought the war to an end. As a result of that, therefore, we commemorate that by the women observing Hanukkah in a greater fashion to some degree than the men do.
You know, it's funny. I want to give people something to relate this to. I don't know if you've seen the movie Braveheart. A lot of Jews, secular Jews in particular, tend not to be fans of Mel Gibson, but there's a scene in there in which the British apparently do something different, do something similarly to the Scottish women, which apparently, by the way, has no basis in reality. He sort of made that thing up, but that's a way for people to relate, and that causes the turn of events that leads to the war and I guess the Mel Gibson character, William Wallace, being the outlaw. By the way, one other ironic note, there was a rumor a few years ago that he was going to make a movie about Hanukkah, a movie which, by the way, has never been made. But that's a tangent. There's one other interesting thought that I can't help but mention here. You know, it's about the women being violated, but you got to think with what we understand about the Greeks back then, and I'm only being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, it's almost as if they would want to violate the grooms. They were very into homosexuality for many centuries, and I often wonder, and you don't have to answer this if you don't know the answer, if it's not politically correct to, but how much of what the Jews or some of the Jews, because it was largely a civil war between Jews, how much of what the Jews were repulsed by in terms of Greek culture was the promotion of homosexuality, which real Judaism was certainly very much against? Was that a part of the Hanukkah story? I've heard that it is.
That's a very good question. The accurate answer is I do not know. But you made a reference to something I didn't quite understand. You said if it's not politically correct. I'm not sure I understand that. If it's correct, it's correct. If it's incorrect, it's incorrect. Where does politically correct fit into the picture?
At a lot of synagogues, but apparently not Chabad of Chesterfield. A lot of rabbis will never talk about that kind of thing. I mean, you know that as well as I do, but I mean, you know exactly what I mean there.
I don't know if it's correct, it's correct. If it's not, it's not.
Okay. Well, we know what Leviticus and, to some extent, Genesis say about the matter, despite what they'll say at a lot of non-Orthodox and even some so-called modern Orthodox synagogues. But, I mean, that's really not the purpose of the talk. I'm genuinely interested because what is often taught is they would make the Jewish students, and I'm really getting off topic here, but they would really make the Jewish students, these basically the equivalent of yeshiva boys, wrestle in the nude. And we know that that's not only about wrestling. And I always thought that was something that really repulsed the Jews back then and may have been part of the straw that broke the camel's back.
That's a wonderful observation. I must run though. So you have a wonderful and happy Hanukkah.
Okay.
And we will talk a little later, okay?
Yeah, thank you for joining me.